We're talking about using humor as a tool, as a very useful tool, because we know the science tells us that humor does actually make people more receptive. And when you say something funny, well, first of all, it relaxes people. And that's really important. You share something common, because if everyone's laughing, then you're sharing a common experience. So you've broken down barriers. And also, when you've made someone laugh, their receptors are immediately more alert to the next thing you say. So the punctuation of humor throughout a talk is really a positive thing, provided you're not offending people. And I trust now that people do understand that there's a line to be crossed, and I'm sure that most of us know what that line is. That it's certainly not punching down. You don't look down on people. If you're going to punch, you punch up. You know, the people that you can quite easily take pot shots, and I'm not talking about Donald Trump. Although I do say to my American friends that today we're speaking from the UK, which, according to Donald Trump's new running mate, is going to be the first Islamic state with full nuclear capability, which I found really quite funny. But you can say anything these days. And when we allow politics to go into the absurd, then we have to counter it with something. You can't just be worthy with your arguments, knowing that you might be correct, but not making the mark. So I just want to talk about a couple of techniques I use. And the most frequently used technique I have is to listen to what people are saying. People are intrinsically funny. I mean, in the west of Scotland in particular, and I had the joy of living there for over 10 years, you know, people are just funny. I'll just keep admitting people. And when you listen and you hear the things that people are saying and you ask the right questions, you get answers that are absolutely true, intuitive, instinctive, and express what people feel about a situation. And if I say to you, you know, I think or I feel, I'll bet you I feel makes a higher impact than I think. Because one is a kind of intellectual speculation, and the other is, this is what I feel. And I'll give an example of this, because one of the things that I do talk about, and I think it's really important, and I noticed that the British Prime Minister today announced that they were going to look at building wealth in every community up and down the country. Now, I've been arguing for quite a long time that rather than talking about tackling poverty, which is, it's a bit of a sinkhole, isn't it? It's not something that lifts the spirits. No one wakes up in the morning and says, let's go out and tackle poverty. But if you start talking about, you know, creating wealth in every community, well, it gives flow to ideas, it gives people agency, it gives energy, and you get lots of ideas. I'm going to show a couple of those ideas later on, but that's the difference. And so I was in this estate on the outskirts of Glasgow called Easterhouse, and it was one part, it was South Easterhouse. This is an estate that was built in the 60s, 70s, housing, you know, upwards of 50,000 people with very few facilities. And I asked this room full of people who were all residents there if they could sum up what life was like in the estate. I was doing this because I was going to be doing, under the guise of a creative agency director, I wanted to put together a campaign, and it was about transferring the stock from the council into housing association hands and to local management. And it was trying to get people to believe that this was possible. So I asked the question, what's life like on this estate? And there was an older woman put her hands up, and she said, well, son, see if you want a suntan or a criminal lawyer, it's a brilliant place to live. But see if you want to buy a banana, you've got to get a bus and go a mile down the road. And I thought that just wrapped it up so beautifully. So this whole campaign used the banana as a symbol of the frown, of the smile, of things going in the right direction, things going in the wrong direction. And it was so simple. Now, the science and the research, I've got all the research, which shows that the market doesn't always respond to people's wants, but the market does determine parameters. So the idea of people buying fruit in Easter House was not seen by any trader as even the remotest possibility. So just to take on that, when I tell that story, people get it. They get it straight away. They understand what you're saying, and it's from the experience of the people. So it's got an element of humor, but more importantly, it makes a point really succinctly and clearly without having to explain the research. And although you've got research to back it up, that story and the way that woman expressed it told everything. In fact, a few years ago, they did an experiment with supermarkets in Fife, here in Scotland. And it was to change those displays as you reach the checkout till. You know the ones I'm talking about: chocolate, little sweetie bars, little things that are so tempting. And we've all done it at some stage, and replace them with fruit. And what they found was people did buy loose fruit. So this mythology that we've built around, Scotland being a non-fruit eating country is not quite as accurate as it's always portrayed. And it just shows you if you provide opportunities. So there's a whole rich source of learning around that. It's something I do talk about because I do think, we need to balance up the economy. It's absurdly unbalanced at the moment. So you can't just talk about figures. You talk about the experiences that people have, and you talk about the reality that people face. So that's how I inject humor. But of course, there's temptation all the time. You look at regional newspapers. I remember this story in the Paisley Evening News years ago, and it was a guy who had been attacked by a dog, a big dog. It was a pretty vicious attack, and the article said then, luckily, so-and-so, aged 21, was passing with a baseball bat in his hand, and he managed to beat off the dog. And the notion of, fortunately, carrying a baseball bat at 1 o'clock in the morning in Paisley, it just amused me. It's just remarkable. I love things like that. I love the story in one of the Ayrshire papers that said, that this crematorium was up for an award yet again, but stiff competition was expected. I mean, I just find these things absolutely marvelous, and people love to laugh. It is instinctual. And when we laugh, we feel a kind of common, experience with people around us. And if you can make a point with it, it's really powerful. I'm just going to show some images to show that you don't even need to speak, that single images can say something. Before we go on to this, can you set that up, Mayowa? Yes, look at this one. I mean, do you need any more words than those that are already there? It is so blindingly obvious and so clear and so compelling for people that are motivated to join Weight Watchers, I imagine. I've never had to do so. But, a single image does that. Next one. This is a work of genius. I don't know if anyone's been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam recently and gone to the cafe. Well, they've taken all the ears off the cups, right? It's just genius. And that's what you get served with. And people are a bit puzzled, but then they get it immediately, because it is just making a statement by making this absurd adaptation by presumably just knocking the handles off each of the cups to make a very clear relationship between the cafe and the artist at the heart of this great empire. It's only a pity he didn't make any money when he was alive, isn't it? Because, but that's an extraordinary statement. It's just a visual trick, and it says something, and it speaks to people. I love that. And just to me, that's just artistry at its best. And of course, humor is work of the arts. It is about finding joy and humor in things that might be benign or even malign. And right now, I think people are craving to share a bit of a laugh, to have a chuckle. Could we go to the next slide, please? This is a hospital in the States, and it's a children's hospital. And they brought in Disney to work with the staff to see if they can, improve the patient experience. To improve the patient experience, to improve clinical outcomes, to reduce the tensions and the anxieties that young people feel when they arrive in a hospital. And I remember going to a children's hospital to get my tonsils and adenoids out. And I remember the hostility of the environment, although there were some coloured paintings and things around. It was pretty testing for a child. So they'd done all the different departments, and they'd found lots of ways of making this whole experience better for the children. And they were finding that, everywhere they went, they were finding people coming up with ideas. And they said, is there anyone else that has any contact with the children that we haven't spoken to? And they said, no, not unless you count the window cleaners. So Disney spoke to the window cleaners and said, look, you've got a critical role here. You do these windows every morning. And what happens? You appear at the windows. Can you use this as an opportunity to bring a smile to the children's faces? Look what they did. And that's extraordinary, isn't it? By opening up a different strain of thoughts, by using the imagination rather than the intellect to try and come up with solutions. And this is just brilliant, because the kids were absolutely enthralled by these window cleaners. And of course, they knew when they came every day, and the sense of heightened anticipation was just always there. So that's what I mean about, humor being not simply a tool to make people laugh, but actually a tool to have all kinds of impacts and benefits on people. So next slide. We were talking earlier on about creating wealth in communities, and I'm glad that this has now been talked about by the governments here. But this is an area in Dresden, in what used to be the old East Germany, and it was a pretty rundown city. Notwithstanding the fact it was heavily bombed during the war. And some architects came up with this idea of taking one of those rundown areas and dividing it up into themes. So you could take a different theme for each block, and they wanted to bring students into the area. They wanted to make it attractive for students to come and live there. So this is just one of the themes. And it looks really nice, doesn't it? Nice turquoise colours, and you've got this piping effect. And when it rains, it plays music. Now, each of the neighbourhoods has a different theme. So what happened as a result of this? Well, first of all, people wanted to move there because the area looked gloriously different. It looked compelling. It looked attractive. It looked different. It looked unique. So people wanted to lay their hat somewhere that had this extraordinary image that was beginning to spread around Germany. But then other things started happening, because people came from all over the world to see these neighbourhoods, and how each neighbourhood had a theme that was really powerful and interactive in some way. So then they started opening cafes, and they started, producing little tourism icons of this wall and the different neighbourhoods. So it actually began to develop the economy, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Now, if you'd looked at it from a very linear point of view, how are we going to generate wealth in this community? Well, we need a business plan. We need, a unique product. But actually, sometimes it comes from a very creative source. It comes from the human imagination. And so when you show examples like this, it sets people off in a slightly more optimistic, creative generation. It really does. It starts bringing ideas to the table. And what I often do when I'm talking, depends on what I'm talking about. If it's just a street talk, this is just feeding ideas to people. It gives them agency in a sense that they have got the possibility of making things different in their communities, for example. But if you follow it up with big creative questions, then things start happening in a different way. So you get these extraordinary ideas suddenly percolating through. And you know, when you get small children involved, perfect. Children are brilliant at ideas. Children don't hold back in ideas. Children don't lack the breadth of imagination. Children don't think logically first and imaginatively second. They do it the other way around. And I don't know if anyone's seen, but the very original TED Talks, the man that really set TED going was Sir Ken Robinson, whose whole mission in life was to, you know, tell us that schools actually kill creativity, and that this great rich resource we have is being deadened in our children, and which narrows the possibilities ahead. And you know, he was a great TED talker. He is still the most watched TED talk of all time. He died 2 years ago, and I remember sharing a stage with him in Liverpool, where he comes from, although he lived in the States latterly. And he talks about the way that he used stories to try and get across, because you can sound worthy when you say schools are killing creativity, you sound preachy. But if he tells a story, like for example this one he told, he said there was a little girl at the back of the classroom and she was drawing away really enthusiastically one morning, and the teacher saw her and kind of, you know, leapt out to the teacher, because she had her hand round the drawing and she was just not engaging with the class in any way. So the teacher went up and says, "So what are you drawing?" And she says, "I'm drawing a picture of God, miss." And the teacher says, "But we don't know what God looks like." And the little girl said, "We will in a minute." Now, that's a beautiful story. It tells us something. It tells us that children have got this innate confidence that they are not just creative, they're not just able to express their imaginations, but they should have confidence in what they're producing. And it is true that if you were to ask someone to do that, you know, years later, when they're 12, when they're 13, it would all have changed. So that's another example. And this is a beautiful example of how, you know, you can use humor with architecture, with design, with the human experience, with human ideas, and create something that doesn't just benefit local people, but also brings tourists and it brings money into the local community. So it's generating wealth. And I want to see more of this, because I think it's amazing. There's so much we can do now that we're talking about building wealth in every community, and it's going to be different. Every area, every different group of people, they've got something unique about them. But we try and teach them to think of things in the same way. Oh no, separate them out. Say, you are unique. Nothing that you've seen from anywhere else should come into your thought. We're starting from a blank sheet of paper. What would you do to make this area attractive, to maybe put the prices up, maybe to attract a particular kind of marketplace here, which should make, is there a design feature? Is there an interactive feature? Is there something that will attract tourists from all over the world? And you start a different dialogue, a different conversation. By the way, I've done it, so I know. And you don't come at it with data. You come at it with ideas and prompts. Can we go to the next slide, please? Is there any more? Yes, this is you might have seen this. This is billboards for The Economist. And of course, you're approaching the billboard, and there you are. And then if we move to the next slide, it lights up when you go underneath the billboard. So it's saying, The Economist enlightens our readers. It's just brilliant, isn't it? You don't need more than that. And you see, we spend so much time to justify what we're promoting that we will go overboard in words. Can we do it with just an image and an action? And that's just genius, isn't it? I love that. So simple. Next one. This is a bit more risque, but it's the Lithuanians have got a pretty growing economy now, and they want to attract more visitors to the island, and particularly to the capital city of Vilnius. But their research around Europe shows that people might have heard of Vilnius, but they don't know what it is. So they said, nobody knows where it is. When you find it, it's amazing. Vilnius, the G-spot of Europe. Well, it's funny, okay? It might offend some people, but it is. It is using humour to make a very striking point that no one knows where Vilnius is. How better to do that? I don't know. Still people coming in, it's great. So that's Vilnius. Is there another slide? I think that might be the last, is it? Oh no, right. Here we go. I get really quite irritated by how we've all been kind of dragooned into using policy speak in our communications. And I'll tell you what I mean. I used to look at recruitment adverts, and they would say, we are an equal opportunities employer, we are a diverse, inclusive employer. You think, you could say that. Do I believe it? I know why you're saying that, because you have to say it, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you are. So every advert had exactly the same lines underneath, diverse inclusivity, right? But McDonald's in Sweden did this ad. This, by the way, is just the top half of the ad. It says we don't hire Turks, Greeks, Poles, Indians, Ethiopians, Vietnamese, Chinese, or Peruvian. You go down a bit and you see the McDonald symbol there, and underneath it's got, neither do we employ Albanians, Greeks, so on. And then it says, we don't care where our staff come from. We employ people from 95 different races, and they speak 85 different languages. Job done. So you, as someone looking for a job, are going to be far more compelled by that because it sounds authentic. And it sounds like, this is a really proud boast of McDonald's. And I don't always agree with McDonald's from its dietary offerings, but they do employ people from all over. They really don't care. They really don't care. They want people who will serve the customers and will provide, a breadth of languages that the customers will want to speak. Interestingly, when research was done about why Americans traveling will choose a McDonald's over any local offerings, do you know why that is? Does anyone know? You can put your hand up if you've got an idea. Or if not, we're going to have a conversation afterwards. But it's because they trust the toilets. People know what a McDonald's toilet is anywhere they go in the world. That's it. That's why young Americans will choose McDonald's first before they go anywhere else, because they trust it. And it's not about the food, because they don't know if the food's going to be exactly the same in Sweden or in Japan as it is in America. But it's the toilets. So McDonald's is in a very comfortable place when it advertises for staff, because it doesn't have to go through ridiculous protocols. It's very confident that it really doesn't care where you come from. It's an inclusive employer. Is there another slide to follow that one, or is that the end? Because now I'll move on to speaking. Is that it? Oh, right, yeah. Sorry, I love this one. If you want to make a point, do it visually. What more do you need to say? Because you could put all kinds of safety information in there, and people will read it and it will make an impact, but that just says it straight, doesn't it? It shows you how you can use just simple imagery to make a point really, really clearly. But this is the value of humor. Humor does this. You can wrap something in humor that makes a point very, very quickly, and it'll be remembered. So I know that when I use humor, which I do all of the time, sometimes more than other times, you know, the first thing that happens is people are so relieved that someone's going to be making them laugh at any stage of the day, because they're quite often quite serious conferences. So first of all, you get that amazing relief, and then you get people laughing, and then you see people begin to relax. But they're also more alert, and they're much more attuned to what's coming next. And they don't know when the next funny is going to be dropped. So they really are, their ears are open, their minds are open, they're receptive, and they remember. And I've had this tested by research because, you know, when I had money, years ago, I got a market research company to go and trail back to people that had attended conferences, 5 years before that. And people remembered the stories and how it made them feel, right? And humor was the number one thing. Stories that had a slightly funny taint to them registered the highest and were remembered. So here's the pitch then. We can drop the slides now. I think that's it. So they can disappear and you just get, oh, someone else coming in. Okay, good. Right. So it's back to me now speaking with my little backdrop here. I hope you like it. So I speak for a living now. I've been doing it for a long time, and I've been through different iterations. Using a bit of humor, cleaning it up a bit, thinking, can I do it without humor? And it always comes back to the same thing, that when you're speaking, you take the subject matter and you break it down and you think, how can I interject a bit of humor here? And you find it. And you find that, if you want to make a statement, for example, I've got a story for almost everything. There was a conference that was about, actually it was the RAF. And the RAF, this was down at RAF Bulmer in the Northumberland coast. And this is where, within 2 minutes, the RAF can be deployed to the skies. I mean, it's an incredible operation. But their big thing was, don't pass anything by that everything you pass by, you accept as your standard. In other words, and it's a bit like Disney, because Disney says, no matter who you are, no matter what your responsibility or your position in the organization, if you see a bit of litter, pick it up. It's not, excuse me, can I get a litter picker? They do it. And the RAF wanted this line to be really pushed, because every single action, everything that someone might miss, everything that someone might mistime has got consequences potentially, right? So I just talked, because I know what they're trying to say, and I talked about Disney, and I talked about some of the things I'd done with Disney, because we partnered with them and brought them over to Scotland to do these Disney masterclasses. And they're a great organization because they think about all of these things. They have it to hand. The person at the back of the queue is just as important as the person at the front of the queue. And if you make them feel like they're at the back rather than the front, you are beginning to lose people's attention. You're beginning to lose their patience. So they find ways of doing that. So anyway, I talked about this friend of mine who lived around the corner. He had 2 little children, aged 3 and 5, and he and his wife would invite me for dinner, every couple of months. And whenever I went there, from the very first time, I was struck when I went to the toilet that the flush didn't work, right? So they had the the lid off the cistern, and you put your hand into the water and you pulled up the stopcock. Some people will know what I'm talking about, and it will flush. And they had a little stool for the children to do it, so that everyone who came to the house either found a diagram beside the toilet, or they just got so used to doing it. And one day I arrived, this is about 13 months after the first time, and oh, hello, welcome, have a seat. And I says, just pop to the toilet. And I went to the toilet, and it had all been fixed. The toilet flushed beautifully. It had all been finished off. And I said, oh, I see you've had your toilet fixed. Yeah, we're selling the house. So I asked the question, why is it we get the house to exactly how we want it when we're just about to sell it? And it's true, isn't it? You know, if you put a box in the corner, I'll unpack that, you know, tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week becomes next month, and so it goes on. So that's what happens. But everyone got that. Everyone absolutely understood that story, that we do it, don't we? We put things and we say we'll clear it up tomorrow, and we just leave it. And then it becomes part of the environment that we accept. And it's stories like that you can draw from your own experience. We've all had those experiences, and we know what it means. It's a metaphor for so many other things, and people really get caught up in metaphors because they understand absolutely that these are things that affect us on a daily basis. And if you can bring something in the workplace or something in the community or something in the business that relates to something we do in our everyday lives, then it becomes very clear to people. You don't have to go into great elaborate explanations. Okay, so I use a lot of experiences and people that I've met because they're always authentic, they're always true, and I always know what the ending is, right? So it is a really rich source of humor, because people do say the funniest things, and people do the funniest things. And when you look at, you know, regional newspapers, if you look at, I mean, I do research all the time, okay? I do it all the time. I also go out and I speak to people, because there is nothing like the source that is around us, because people are extraordinary. People are really funny. And, you know, when I looked on Father's Day at this full-page advert in the newspapers a few years ago, and it was an advert by Durex, who make the condoms, and it said, to all those who use our competitors' products, happy Father's Day. Just brilliant, isn't it? You don't need to do any more than that. So if you can find those little nuggets, they are just magical. We had a challenge to try and get people to come to a public meeting in Toll Cross in Glasgow. This is years ago, and of course, people advertise public meetings. Who goes to public meetings? I mean, they're not, unless you're a really Mr. or Mrs. Angry person, you stay away from them by and large, unless you've got a real complaint. So we changed that, and we just said, come along Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, hear what your neighbours are saying about you. Right? The numbers went up. And it was just psychological. There was no truth in it. But it was, you know, people will talk about you, so come along and hear what they're saying. And it just changed the dynamic. Trying to get people to take up learning about drugs so that they could monitor their children much more effectively. I was sent a paragraph which I said, we can't put that out in the public domain because no one's going to read it. So I ended up with, can you tell your crack from your elbow? That was the question, right? Crack being cocaine. And it worked, because It is so much easier to just put the hard yards into being creative, finding a bit of humor. Humor does work. You know the story of Virgin Atlantic. Richard Branson's, he went into airline business, he fancied it, and he said to someone, he said, "You fancy running an airline?" The guy says, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, let's set it up." That's how Virgin Atlantic started. But if you flew from London to New York, in club class, there was a little feature that no one really missed when they went on board. When they brought the meals out, they had little salt and pepper silver crusette sets. And of course, they were very small, inobtrusive, so people started, putting them in their pockets, in the folds of the magazines, in their hand luggage, and they would leave with them at the end. Of course, when they got home, they would, invite their friends round and say, "Oh, we had a wonderful time in New York, and we went to Florida, and we went over west, and brilliant time, and got some photographs if you want to see them." And then they sit around and they have snacks, and the guests might say, "That's a lovely little salt and pepper crusette set. Where'd you get it from?" And they turn it over and it says, "Stolen from Virgin Atlantic." Right? Humor. Brilliant. Part of the marketing. That's great marketing, isn't it? So I hope I'm getting across the fact that humor is a great communication tool. It's a persuasion tool. It just gets to places where you can't normally find yourself, because we tend to be hidebound by the way that we are supposed to use language. Am I right? So I want to really go for this now and say, look, humor is really, really important. So when we're talking, use humor. Use humor, don't be afraid of it, but don't try and become a comedian, because if you're not a stand-up comedian, and I'm not a stand-up comedian, couldn't be further from it. But I've learned how to just lean my personality into the humor, because I listen to people and I interpret what they say. I listen to things, I get crazy ideas in my head when I'm looking at something and I see a way of doing it differently. But mainly, I just keep my eyes open all the time. If you go into a tram, a train, or a bus, you will hear things that are just absurd, funny, ridiculous. And if you can bring them into your speech to make a point, it's really brilliant, isn't it? It just resonates with people in a different kind of way. It rings a different bell. So I've been doing it for years, and the amount of humor I use now has gone up, because it's almost like testing the time. And I think there's a lot of misery around just now. And I know that, people want to smile, they want to laugh. When they walk on stage, you smile. That smile lights up people's emotions. It makes them feel better. So, you think of every interaction we have in business. You can test all these points. When people see your front door, when they come into the office, what do they feel? What are they experiencing? And if you were to test each one of these, you would find a different solution to, trying to influence the mood. And it's a bit like when you're talking. So I was working with this organization in the north of England a few years ago, and the person that had the biggest gripe was the receptionist, because she said, "I get everyone's gripes. I get everyone complaining. And then they sit in reception, and of course they're getting more and more impatient. Who gets it? It's me. When you say I'll be out in a minute and you take a long time." Yeah? So you can understand, why is this person getting all the flack? So we did a creative session. Someone said, "Why don't you take the 50 funniest moments from TV comedy and put it up on the screen, because you've got stuff up there that no customer's really interested in. They don't want to know, The next policy issue statement is going to be released on such and such a day. They don't want to know the amendment to your handbook, chapter 29, line 123. They're not interested in that. But they did that. So they put the 50 top comedy moments, and they had it playing on a loop on this screen. It all changed for the receptionist. She had to try and persuade people to leave their seat to go and see the person in the organisation. The complaints stopped. And the trouble she had was trying to get people to leave rather than to settle down and just accept that there might be a bit of waiting time. So simple, but so off the wall at the same time. Because you couldn't make that up. You couldn't just, it is the human experience. Because people instinctively want to laugh. And laugh diffuses tension. So when you're speaking, there's always tension in the room. You stand up on stage, there's always tension. People don't know what to expect. They're a bit worried. People at the front feel they're within your line of sight. There's an anxiety. They don't know who you are. So, the first thing you do is smile. The second thing you do is make a funny comment. When you start out, and suddenly you've got this dialogue. It's an unspoken dialogue. And it's pretty magical. So that's what I do. So let me just go over how I introduce comedy. Because it's not about telling jokes. It's about telling about people you've met, things that you've seen, experiences you've had. It's maybe a few one-liners like, the old Scottish comedian Chick Murray said he was lying on his back, against the hard pavement, and this woman was passing. She says, "What happened, son? Did you fall?" He says, "No, I was just trying to bake a bar of toffee in my back pocket." Life's full of humour. So my proposition is use it. Source it from your own experience. Listen to what people say. Watch television programs. Read newspapers. Read magazines. Look at cartoons. And just assemble those little nuggets that you can present as part of your presentation. But the most important thing is if you can wind them around a reality. So that you don't have to explain something to the nth degree. You can wrap it in a story. It's like the Durex to our competitors. People who buy our competitors' projects, Happy Father's Day. You don't need to say more than that. That's the beauty of humour. And I don't see enough of it now when people are speaking. And I really want to promote this idea that it really is important now. We are living in pretty miserable times. A lot of people are living pretty miserable lives at the moment. And it becomes ever more important to make sure that they get some levity in their life and that they give a sense of their agency, their capability of making things happen in this world which seems to crunch people. It does. It depresses people. It makes them feel powerless. And I want to change that. And humour is a great empowerer because you're talking a language that people do talk. So any questions now? I'm going to open it up. Any questions or comments on anything I've said or anything you want to add from your own experience? I'm going to ask, should I unmute everyone? No, just let me know if you want to speak. And yes, so
Mike, I think you've muted yourself.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise you were just unmuting me. Yes, that was terrific, Mike. Thanks for that. Great to see you, my friend. What jumped out for me there was receptors up, and it reminds me of a wee story us marketers have, whereby there was a a test done, a proper study done, and they got an audience of people, I can't remember how many were there, and they put out 10 different glasses of wine, and they put them from £1 to £10. You get the gist. And they tested to see which ones people favoured and thought were the best. And of course, no surprises, the one that was the £10 one or €10 or whatever it was seen to be an awful lot better than the one. Now that's something that, cognitive behavioural scientists better than me will know. But the thing is, what I didn't realise is that the thing itself, the wine itself, was all the same wine in each glass. So it's not as if it was just different glasses, different wines that were different pricing. But I thought, wow! And what they found was it was the expectation that the wine was going to be better actually made the receptors, the taste receptors, better. And I thought that's what you just reminded me about. And I thought I'd never thought of humour as something that could actually enhance not only your receptors but your perception.
Yes, indeed. In fact, it's about, I think in advertising and marketing, we've both been in the industry, it's about perceived value. How you can create perceived value. There's a great TED talk by a guy called Rory Sutherland, who's got a background in advertising, and he talks about the multi-billions of pounds that were planned for investment in making the Eurostar just 15, 20 minutes faster. And he was arguing that it would actually be cheaper to pay supermodels to go around up and down the carriages pouring people Chateau Lafite. That they wouldn't care about the extra 15 minutes if you were giving them a positive experience. And it's all about perceived value, because you don't really, in all honesty, say I can't get Eurostar because it arrives 15 minutes later than I want to arrive there. Do you? Really? In all honesty? So it's all about creating perceived value. He also said that paedophiles should be made to drive Porsche Carrera 911s, which is a very strange assertion, but I see what he's getting at. But it is about perceived value, and I think that in advertising you begin to understand that you could sell anything, really. There is one where Shreddies, they come in squares, right? You think of Shreddies as squares. And they actually did a tasting in Canada with a sample group where they had some of them turned on their side, so it was a diamond shape. And they were asking people which tasted better, the old square shape or the diamond shape. Bearing in mind, it's exactly the same. And people thought the diamond shape tasted better because it was obviously an amended product, all about perceived value. And people, it's not difficult to sell to people, but honesty and truth and humor are good. Honesty, truth, and humor are a great combination. It's not, politicians can say what they want now, can't they? It's become an extraordinary time in international politics where people can literally say anything they want. They can say Britain is going to be the first Islamic state with a full nuclear capability and get away with it. But humour does matter. And I'll tell a story from, there was a time in the early 80s when I was with BBC Scotland. I was a kind of intern there. And one morning, I arrived there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the producer was a girl called Kirsty Wark. She was very young then. She's obviously since gone on to greater things and just retired from BBC after many, many years. But we got this story from Reuters that the Reverend Ian Paisley, who of course led the unionist cause in Ireland with such ferocity, and he was a big, imposing man. He'd marched his followers up to the top of a hill, and they'd burnt this bonfire, and they were making hellish pronouncements about what they were going to do to Catholics. It was just the most bizarre thing ever. So Kirsty Walker says, oh, what a story that is. Can we get a hold of Jerry Fitt? He was the Social Democratic Labour Party member, a moderate, one of the great figures in Northern Ireland who managed to, quell the tensions and eventually move towards a peaceful solution. So I phoned him up and it was 5:15 in the morning now. So Jerry, would you be willing to give a comment to BBC Radio Scotland? This is Good Morning Scotland. And he said, yeah, of course. He says, what's it about? So Kirsty Ward took up the reins and she explained that what Ian Paisley had done in the middle of the night. She says, can you give me a response to that? And he said, okay. Ask me the question. He's standing there in his dressing gown, presumably. And she tells him the story and he said, well, last night I was going to bed, it was about midnight, and I stood on the landing and I looked up into the sky and I saw there was a full moon. And I said to myself, shouted to my wife, I wonder what that man Paisley's doing tonight. That was it. It networked all over the BBC network. And that's one of the reasons that Kirsty Wark got down to, work with Radio 4 down in London, and it elevated her. Just taking a statement of such simplicity without making any other comment. It was just a piece of genius for a politician to wake up in the morning, be woken up the sound of an imposing telephone call, and then to come up with that line in moments. Genius. That's the beauty of humour. If he'd taken up the political argument, it would have been entirely different. It would have been adversarial. He made a joke about it. And it became one of the most legendary answers that any politician has ever given on news broadcasting, because it was just so clever and so funny. And it's in the tape of BBC's got a tape of all these different things that made it right around the country. So that's the beauty of it. Anyone else got any comments? Are you sold on the idea of humour as a vital and impressive and persuasive communication tool? You don't even need words. An image can do it. Yeah? And when you do it, don't punch down, don't laugh at people who are poor, laugh at people who are nuts and wealthy. Tell stories about your own experience. Listen to what people are saying. Read regional newspapers, because you always get these lovely little vignettes in local newspapers. And all these things, you just add them to a cornucopia of humorous things that you can use as interruptions to your presentation. Even better if you can wrap something up in humor that makes a really clear point. And you don't need to explain it with any depth and any logical explanation. It's brilliant. It works. So I implore you, this has just been a very quick presentation. Obviously, it's a huge subject. I hope you enjoyed it, and that I made a point. Oh, for goodness sake, everyone's mute all. Mute all, I can't hear you. This is a one-way, but if there's anything you want to say, just hold up your hand.
And I've had a great time. I've got to roll. I hate to come in late and then roll early, but I do. I've got live myself here in a few minutes. Thanks for this. This is fabulous, Mike. Great job, man.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you. That's it. Thank you so much, my friends, for coming along. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.